Welcome to Monday through Friday, Cellular Agriculture for a Pandemic-Free Future. My name is George Ortega. This is episode number 37, and I'm recording it on Wednesday, August 26th, 2020 at 5:37 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, today we're going to get back to the basics. We've gotten into the morality of this issue, and a strong argument for ending factory farming immediately and transitioning to cellular agriculture, clean meat, is that these epidemics are increasing in frequency, and that's the point that I want to begin with today. All right, now what I'd like to do is share my screen, because I just created a table, and I'll show it to you now. Now, for those of you on iTunes, Spotify, on the podcasts, I'm going to be basically describing what I'm showing the television viewers. So, you're not going to miss anything by this. So I just compiled, I spent the last hour doing this, a list of the number of the common era epidemics by millennium, century, decade, and year, to show you what we're up against. Okay, and some of you may have already gleaned the message of this just by scanning the table. So, but I'm going to go through this. And again, I've gotten this from a list of epidemics that I found on Wikipedia. It's generally a good source for this kind of information. So again, let's just go through this. The first century, there were no pandemics. The second century, there was one. The third, there was one. The fourth, none. The fifth, 400 to 500. None. 5 to 600, 1. 6 to 700, 3. 7 to 800, 2. 800 to 900, 0. 9 to 1,000, 0. 1,000 to 1,100, 0. 1,100 to 1,200, 0. 1,200 to 1,300, 0. 13 to 1,400, 1. 14 to 1,500, 2. Now here we get to 1,500 to 1,600. And here's where the numbers start climbing. Again, these are epidemics, some of which turned into pandemics. So from 1500 to 1600, we had 11 epidemics. And it's pretty easy to figure this out. Like Columbus discovered America in 1492, right? Right before, so that was the era of exploration by ships. That ultimately resulted in colonization. You had this world, Europe expanding across the world. There was much greater travel throughout the world, and through, not just country to country, but within countries. Because again, this is epidemics. This isn't necessarily about pandemics that include the entire world. So, all right, so this first century of mass exploration, by sea, again, 11 pandemics. By the next century, 1600 to 1700, there's twice as many, 2.5 times almost as many epidemics, 24. Okay, in the 1700s, that number climbs by about a third. There's 33. In the 1800s, there are 55. Okay. Now, in the 1900s, let me just see if I can do this ad. I didn't include I should do this, but there's 46, 50, 67, 73, 83. So in the 1900s, there have been 83 pandemics total. Okay. So that's, that's 30 times more than in the 1800s. Now here's where we get, we've gone from century to decade, and now we're at year. so like, from 2000 to 2010, we had 40 epidemics. Okay, but actually, let me go through this. Sorry, let me go through this one by one. So from 1900 to 1910, we had 5 epidemics. 1910, 1920, 5 again. In the 20s, we had 4. In the 30s, we had 2. In the 40s, we had 6. 50s, we had 1, but it was a major one. That was the 1957 pandemic. It took 4 years to develop a vaccine for that. That was the fastest we've ever developed vaccine. 1960 to 1973. In the 70s, we had 7. In the 80s, we had 4. In the 90s, we had 6. And then in the 2000s to 2010, we had 40. Okay, now I think, that's I should pause for this. We've gone from less than 10 in these first years of the first decades of the 1900s to in the first decade of the millennium, this 2000 millennium, we've got 40. Now, what's this about? It's about greater population. It's about greater airport travel, airline travel. There are 4 billion passenger flights each year that explain this pretty much. It's not just that. It's like it probably does. That's probably explains. And this whole the increase through the 1900s through 2000 is also explained by the increase in factory farming. All right, so now we're at 2011. So we've got 2. We had 2 in 2012, 2, 2013, 5, and 14, 2, and 15, 1, 16, 2, and 17, 3, 18, 2. 2019, we had 7. Okay, and 2020, we've only had 1 in 2020, probably because everybody's shut down because of the epidemic that started in 2019, this coronavirus we're struggling with now. So let's add this up. So we've got 9, 13, 15, 28. 28 in this decade, this last decade. It wasn't as bad as the decade of between 2000 to 2010, as you see, there was 40, but we were not so lucky. One of these, our 2019 COVID-19 is what we're dealing with now. So I'm going to stop sharing, and so like now I think you have an idea of why it's imperative. It's not an option. It's not a reasonable option, to not end factory farming as soon as we can and transition to this cellular agriculture would be beyond reckless. It would be totally irresponsible. Irresponsible to whom? To us, but not just to us, to future generations, to our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. It's very important for you to understand this. That's why scaling up, fast-tracking cellular agriculture, the production of clean meat, fish, dairy, eggs, lab-grown products that don't involve any animal cruelty, and then, more importantly to us, that are pandemic-free, that we basically eliminate the risk in pandemics through making this transition. You see how it's the rate of epidemics, pandemics, and this, I haven't even included, that was, that table included just the epidemics, and some of them are turned into pandemics. But what I didn't include there are the numerous outbreaks. For example, several months ago in a farm in North Carolina, South Carolina, one of the Carolinas, there was a swine flu outbreak. They had to kill 30,000 pigs because there was an outbreak. Now, I've got to do some more research. I'm guessing the outbreaks every year I wouldn't be surprised if they number certainly in the tens, but perhaps there are over 100 outbreaks each year. Again, I've got to look, and so like we're playing Russian roulette. You know, any of these outbreaks could turn into an epidemic, and these epidemics turn into pandemics. And again, like, don't go by the past decade, especially before 1950, to assess our risk of these epidemics turning into pandemics. You have to keep in mind what's extremely important for you to consider is the amount of air travel. 4 billion passenger flights each year, and you know, who knows how many passengers on each of those flights to every continent. And now, so like, there are a lot of, you know, we here in the United States are working on prevention through contact tracing and through distancing and masks. And, but, you know, you have to understand that let's say we have another outbreak, right? And let's say we're prepared, you know, to contain, you know, outbreaks that might happen here. You know, we contact trace them. We have the CDC and you know, other organizations are really good to constrain, you know, one that might happen here. But let's imagine in a couple years, several years, one begins in Africa, in a country in Africa, a very poor country in Africa, that you know, China is investing in the African countries, trying to develop their economy, something we in the United States should have been doing, you know, and we're really negligent on that. We really need to, not just for their sake, but for our sake, help these African countries develop their economies. So, you know, let's say an outbreak begins, and a lot of them have recently, that there's different Ebola strains, you know, developing different countries. So you have an epidemic that develops in one of these African countries, and you have the air travel. So like, you know, you have, you know, somebody from that country, let's say, travels to China. Again, China's investing heavily in the African countries. And then from China, you know, their business people travel the world. You know, they're the manufacturers of the world. So like in 2 steps, you have, you know, potential epidemic turn into a pandemic. And like, you know, again, I can't overly stress the point that while we here in the United States may take measures to prevent our outbreaks from turning into epidemics and epidemics from turning into pandemics, because of the current economic nature of our world, because there are so many poor countries that don't have the resources we do, we cannot expect those countries to be as successful. And as we've seen with the coronavirus, to contain it, you know, we have to shut down our economy. So like, you know, and that is the prevention. That is the prevention strategy, not just distancing, not just contact tracing, but shutting down businesses, shutting down society. That is our method of containment. So in terms of preventing, you know, future pandemics, we really can't rely on addressing, mitigating, containing a pandemic or an epidemic that's already started, especially if it starts in another country. You know, that's just a very unrealistic, unreasonable, you know, method to remain safe. All right, so you understand, you now understand that this isn't a 1 in 100 year event like some pundits, media people, politicians try to say. You know, these pandemics are increasing, epidemics are certainly increasing. 1980s gave us HIV/AIDS. It's killed over 20 million people. You know, so we can't rely on luck that this next decade and the next decade after that before we're able to develop, hopefully, universal vaccines against all strains of virus, influenza, coronavirus, different strains. We can't rely on luck that the next pandemic won't strike in, let's say, 5 years, 10 years before these vaccines are available. And again, think of the economics, the basic math. According to the CDC, the Congressional Budget Office, we are expected to spend $8 trillion on this coronavirus. Now, with that perspective, for us to, again, as soon as Biden takes office in 2021, in March, April, very early in his administration, we need to release this $50 billion that I've been, and this is a ballpark figure. I mean, this $50 billion, that we would release to fast track the cellular agriculture industry. I've said this before, it represents 0.5% of what we're going to be spending on this coronavirus. So to not make that expenditure is beyond foolish. It's playing with fire. It's just like, and again, like this $50 billion figure, it's a ballpark figure. It could be 100 billion, and like, for example, I made the comparison several episodes ago between the average homeowner in the United States. Let's say a homeowner, not in Westchester, but in some other parts of the country where houses are cheaper, they buy a home for $220,000. Okay, and they basically end up spending for homeowners insurance to protect their house from theft, fire, things that virtually never happen. The average homeowner spends about $1,000 a year. So over a 10-year period, they'll have spent $10,000, which represents about 4.5% of their investment, of the cost of their home, their house, right? So now consider that, 4.5% of what this coronavirus is costing us would be about $350 billion. So like this $50 billion that I believe is probably enough to get the job done is much less than even a homeowner pays to insure against something that almost never happens, where in this, funding the cellular agriculture, we're protecting ourselves against something that will absolutely happen, and perhaps much more hurtfully, more catastrophic than this coronavirus has been. All right, I want to share that screen again because let's see if I can glean a few more meanings from it. I will, yeah, I mean, all right, so let's do from the beginning of the Common Era to the entire first millennium, okay? We have 1, 2, 3, 6, 8 epidemics. The entire 1,000 years, 8 epidemics. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, you can see it. It gets from the 1100s to the 1900s. There are, I'm not going to do the math, there seem to be a bit over 100. Okay, and then the 1900s to 2000s. Well, then we get into decades. All right, now I better stop the screen share. So I mean, I'll try to glean more insights into this in future episodes. All right, that's why this is so important. You have to keep this in mind. It's not, epidemiologists are very responsible, contagious disease experts. They'll tell you over and over, it's not a matter of if another pandemic is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And based on these figures, based on that table that I just showed you, it is not unreasonable to expect that another pandemic may come in 5 years or 10 years. I mean, face it, I mean, our world has not been that lucky. You know, we've got Trump as our president. You know, we're being punished. If we want to get theological, religious about this, yes, you know, we do a lot of bad. I mean, let's transition. There are four major evils that we are not fundamentally responsible for. Again, don't blame yourself because you didn't create this world. You didn't choose to be in it, you know, and the world basically conditioned you for how you are. But collectively, there are four great sins that we're committing. The first is this ungodly, unconscionable treatment of over 70 billion farm animals each year. The kind of abuse and torture they go through is beyond belief. And I'll, you know, I will devote future episodes to going into the details of this. Just one, you know, right now. The egg-laying hens, they're kept in battery cages that are stacked on top of each other. So there may be 3-4 rows where the chickens on top are urinating and defecating on the chickens below. And they are cramped together, 4, 5, 6 chickens per cage. And the cage is about a foot by a foot by a foot, or perhaps a bit wider. But the point is that the cages are so small that no one chicken in any of these cages has enough room to even spread their wings. Okay, that's just one example of how horribly we're treating these animals. So, yeah, if you want to get religious, theological, I think God's telling us enough. Enough is enough. You know, God told us that with slavery, you know, so by 1865, because some of us didn't listen, the southern states, who are still, you know, perpetuating racism, who still haven't learned their lesson, because we couldn't, you know, come together to end slavery peacefully. We fought the Civil War. Now, I think we're fortunate that we don't have to fight a war about this. You know, all we have to do is end the factory farming, you know, to redeem ourselves. And getting back to the global aspect of all this, again, you know, one of the four major sins, the second one is global poverty. We've had the resources to end global poverty for decades. Back in 1970, there was a Pearson Commission that was commissioned by the United Nations, conducted in Canada. It determined that if the top richest 22 countries of the world would donate 0.7% of their annual GDP, gross domestic product, their annual income, less than 1% each year, that they could end global poverty. You know, that has never happened. You know, the United States has been one of the most delinquent in meeting that goal, because the United Nations agreed to that goal. You know, and year after year, I think only a few of the Scandinavian countries have ever you know, donated over 0.7%, perhaps 1% of their GDP, which, I mean, give me a break. It's nothing to begin with. So global poverty, and relative to that, we're going to have to develop these countries. You know, we're going to have to end probably global poverty to a certain extent to be free of future pandemics, because these poor countries will have to be able to contain outbreaks, and that requires resources. The other two major sins, collective sins, we're ignoring climate change. That's probably the greatest of the sins, because, like, you know, the planet will be warming and getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And you don't want to know the details of, you know, by the time it gets to the 21st to 22nd century, when our kids today, if you've got a kid growing up, you know, who was born in 2020, they're going to be alive, chances are, by 2100. And, you know, unless we do something, unless we do a lot of serious work, they're going to be living in a heat hell, you know. And the last of our four sins is abortion. I mean, you know, we end the lives of as many unborn children every year as die of every other cause of death combined. 50 to 60 million abortions every year. That's how many people die every year on this planet, who are born. So we've got our work cut out for us. And it is moral. This is not, we don't lack the financial resources to prevent these pandemics. We don't lack the technology. We don't lack the organization. The only thing we lack is the will, the resolve. And the reason we do that is because we need to strengthen our conscience. We need to become better people, if not for the practical reasons, relative to this table I just showed you of the increasing frequency of epidemics, if not for our sake, for the sake of our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Yesterday, I devoted the episode to painting a good picture. It wasn't about moving away from this like I've gone to again today, but it was about creating a much better future. And again, I'm going to keep trying. I'll tape it up, God willing, I'll tape an episode tomorrow, and hopefully I can transition back to that more positive frame, because I think you do need, this is difficult to listen to, and I think it'll be helpful for you to imagine what an amazing, blissful, morally upright world we can create by initiating this process, by making this transition from factory farming of animals, to the cellular agriculture industry. All right, we've got a minute left. Thanks for watching. Catch this every Monday through Friday on White Plains Community Media, channel 76 with Optimum, 45 with Verizon. And the episodes are also in video on YouTube. And they are now in audio on iTunes, Spotify, several other podcast providers. I hope you are having a good Thursday. And again, your job is to talk to people about this. Don't remain silent about it. Talk to your friends about it. See if they don't know, do a little research. This is not difficult to research. Any of these facts that I'm presenting, they're out there. Just Google them. Just make sure you get a reliable source. You don't want one of these alt-rights, conspiracy theory things that thinks this is a hoax. All right. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.